Hey lads, today I'm going to a chess over the board tournament in Arizona here, Mesa, where I live. It's the Rising Stars chess tournament. It's a rapid tournament, 45 minutes plus 10 seconds of move. I'm excited to play in it. I think there's about 85 people signed up, maybe more. And in my section, there's a bunch of people. I'm going to be playing in the 16 to 1800 section, which is the highest section I've played in so far. I'm currently rated just over 1500, and so I can pay a little extra to play up a division, which I think is really cool. So might be challenged a bit more today. Might lose all my games, but let's see what we can do.
In round one, my opponent didn't show up, and so the tournament director asked me if I wanted to play somebody in the next division up. So my opponent here is in the 18 to 2000 section, although he was also paying up, or playing up. So he is rated a little over 1700. I think he was like a 1720, 1730. And so for him to lose this game would mean a lot of rating loss. For me to gain this would mean I would gain a lot of rating. And we have a simple exchange Caro Kann on the board. I was excited to be playing up a division, even more than the division I was already in. I was the lowest person rated in the division that I was playing up in, 1500 in a 16 to 1800, and then playing up another division on top of that. It's just kind of exciting for me to play somebody who's rated much better and was hoping that I could get a draw or a win in this game. Now, he brought his bishop out to d3 here immediately, and you can see I'm having a long think here. I don't know if I should play this the way I play online a lot of the time, which is the move g6. And g6, I can bring my bishop out to f5. And I thought, yes, it's good, but I want to play as solid as I can today. I don't need to be playing for quick attacks down the G file. I just wanted to play really good moves. And so I brought my knight out to f6, and f6 allows my bishop to come out to g4 instead of bringing it out to f5, and g4 is the desired square. So here, I'd be extremely happy if he went knight f3. Knight f3 would allow me to just put my bishop on g4 like a regular exchange Caro Kann. I'd play e6 and then go for a minority attack, which is what I was thinking of. Get short castled, bishop on e7 or d6. But here he plays the move c3, still not allowing me to know if he's going to push the move f3 when I come out to g4. So I'm still thinking bishop g4, but a little more unsure with the f3 idea. And then I thought, well, I can bring it out to g4. I am defending that square with the knight on f6. And if he pushes, I'll just pull back to h5 and then place my bishop on g6. I know this is not wrong. It looked interesting. It looked good. So this is what I played. Now, my opponent's next move was one that took me by surprise. I was really expecting knight f3 or f3, but he played his queen out to b3, and he's immediately attacking my b7 pawn, so I need to defend the pawn. The way you would do that, I thought, was either queen d7 or queen c7, and there is a difference, and it's an important difference. Now, I ultimately decided on the move queen c7, but the queen on c7 doesn't protect the d5 pawn. And because of this, I'm going to need to defend that pawn very carefully. I did take a lot of time in this opening, and I'm glad that I did because it was something that was unfamiliar to me. But in this position here, my opponent played the move, the top engine move, h3. Now, h3 is interesting. I have to be very careful because if I pull my bishop back to h5, which is what I would do online in a rapid game, in a blitz game without thinking too much, he would probably hit me with g4. And then my only move really is to go bishop g6. I could take maybe with a knight, h takes, and then I take on g4 with my bishop. But that didn't look good. It looked like I'm just giving him a minor piece for 2 pawns. So, h5 He goes g4. I come back to g6. And then I realized he could play the move g5. And g5 would force my knight to jump somewhere. And wherever it jumps, my d5 pawn is left unprotected. And I was trying to figure out where I went wrong. Now, apparently this is all book, what I've done so far. But it seemed like now I realized I need my queen on d7. And I can understand why putting the queen on c7 was maybe not so accurate. Essentially, the position I'm in now is I have to pull my bishop back to d7, and I didn't think this was ideal. It didn't seem fun having my bishop on the inside of the pawn chain, and if my queen had been on d7, I would be playing h5, or bishop h5, and then right back to g6 if he attacked again, and my pawn on d5 would be protected. So in this position, I played bishop to d7. I'm glad that my analysis and the time I took to find this move paid off. But now I was going to be left with a bad bishop on the inside of a pawn chain, and I'd have to be playing this a little bit like a French defense, which is not something I was super happy about. Here, my opponent simply developed his knight to f3, and I closed off my pawn chain with the move e6, defending d5. Now my knight is able to freely move. My opponent castled his king, and I developed my knight to c6, getting another piece into the action. My opponent moved his rook over to e1, pinning the pawn on e6. And so now I have to decide, what do I do about this pin? And I knew that I needed to develop my bishop. Putting the bishop on e7 seemed the most logical. It got out of the pin and allowed my bishop to be developed and my king to castle. My opponent's next move was knight a3, and this move took me a little bit by surprise. The only square that he can really jump to is to b5. And so I thought pawn to a6 looks the most logical. I spent about 3 minutes considering some other moves here. But yeah, a6 just seemed quite natural. And I didn't think that it was going to be an issue because I wanted to play b5 myself anyway, while going for some sort of minority attack. That's what you often do in the exchange, Caro Kann. So this kind of sort of just made so much sense. You always play a6 to prepare b5, and now I have even more of a reason for playing it. My opponent spent about 6 minutes on his next move, and he played the knight right back to b1. This gave me a lot of confidence, knowing that he just spent 2 moves. I got a development move in a6 that I wanted to get in, and now it was my move on top of that. So I was feeling very good here. I thought that that was probably a mistake to play back to b1. Because he spent so long making those moves, and you know, the tempo of going knight a3 and then back to b1, I didn't feel bad about playing the move pawn to h6, which is normally a move I wouldn't feel comfortable playing. I was really considering castling either side. I didn't know if queen castle or kingside castle was better, but I also didn't want to give him a target to lock in on. And if I castle kingside here immediately, then you know, he's able to start developing where he wants to go. He plays his knight to d2. This makes logical sense. He has now found a path for his knight to be on, and d2 definitely looks better than a3, but his pieces are still quite bad. His bishop's blocked in on c1. Where's it going? You know, it's looking good for me. However, my light squared bishop is behind my pawn chain, and I'm still not sure on where I should castle. I spent several minutes thinking and then decided to go for the minority attack. Now, Alex Banzea says in his Caro Kann videos, get your king castled and then go for the minority attack. I suppose here the engine doesn't really mind it. Both moves are about equal. But yeah, it's probably a good habit just to castle my king before pushing pawns. I just didn't want to give him a target to lock in on. He goes pawn to a3, not allowing my pawn to push up to b4. I'm considering here maybe a5 and then b4, and now it seems a lot less appealing. I did wonder, should I swing a rook somewhere? This actually seemed like a good idea. I put my rook onto c8. My position seemed fine. The only thing that was sort of a negative was My pieces feel a little congested, like a little, lack of space. I suppose that's the way to put it. Yeah, I feel like I have a lack of space. And that pawn chain from f7 up to d5 is kind of, making my pieces feel a little constricted, especially my light squared bishop on d7. Not a happy camper. And here my opponent plays his knight into e5, making my position even more uncomfortable. Now here I really started to think about playing my knight over to a5. I actually had a really long think here, and I saw queen d1 or queen c2, and then I was considering pushing some pawns. I didn't quite know though exactly what was best, and I think I probably could have gone for it in retrospect. But here, yeah, we just played the bishop out to d6, hitting the knight on e5, asking it what is it doing there, fully expecting him to take either my bishop or my knight. I was expecting more of him to take my knight, which is what he went for. And the reason he doesn't want to take the bishop is because my bishop's a really bad piece behind the pawns. However, I still have the bishop pair, and that gave me a little bit of hope if I'm able to sort of open up the position a bit. I'm just going to have to be looking for some pawn break at some point. Before that, though, I thought it's time that I need to castle. And so here I was really wondering, do I short castle and give him a target? And this is what I decided on. First, I took his knight back on c6. He moved his other knight into f3. And I short castled, giving him a target. It was the second best move in the position. The best move was knight to e4, which I wasn't looking at because bishop takes, pawn takes. I have doubled pawns. Yes, he has to move his knight somewhere. Maybe then I could play f5. I wasn't really sure. Nothing about that seemed good. However, his bishop was extremely powerful on that long light square diagonal, and even trading it off for a knight and a pawn might have been a good idea. But yeah, he now has a plan to go for my king, and he can start positioning his pieces to attack it. My opponent repositions his queen on d1. All his pieces are starting to come alive here. Both bishops looking down towards the king side, the queen looking down towards the king side, looking very ugly for me. My best move here again is knight to e4. I'm not finding that move. Next best move is bishop e8. Very difficult to find. And then a third best move is queen to b6. I'm not finding these moves. I play the move queen to c7, lining up with the bishop. My opponent slides his second knight into e5, and I immediately play king to h8. Couldn't tell you why I was so ready to play this move. I think there was a few different options, but taking the knight off definitely didn't seem like one of them, because if he captures with a rook, then he's lifted a rook and his queen's getting active on g4. I think I just didn't want my king to be in the firing line. My opponent here plays the move queen to f3. And here I became keenly aware of his idea. Sacrificing his bishop on h6, and if g takes h6, he wins my knight with check. And I can't even defend my pawn on h6, just would look like game over. So there's a few options here. I can go queen d8, which is making another queen move, but it at least defends the knight on f6, so there's no sacrifice of the bishop on h6. Or I could take his knight on e5 and defend for one move my knight on f6. This seemed more appealing to me because both of my bishops were kind of bad. If his pawn were to take, then I think I'm fine with that. I thought maybe there would be chances of me rerouting my knight around and attacking that pawn. His queen's on f3, so blocking the defense of the f2 pawn, moving up to protect e5. So this seemed kind of good, and I decided to take his knight. He captured the bishop with the pawn, like I expected. And you know what they say, if there's a knight on g8, there is no mate. Actually, that's a knight on f8, that saying doesn't work when the knight's on g8. However, I did like that I was guarding the h6 pawn, which his bishop was still looking at with my knight here on g8. My opponent now moves in queen to h5. Something you have to be very careful about doing is pushing pawns in front of your king, but my plan here was g6 with king g7. I have a defender of the h6 pawn already, and if he were to take on h6 here with the queen, I'd take with knight, and if he were to take with the bishop, then I'd take his queen on h5. So right now I'm okay, and I thought I have just enough time to get my king to g7 to solidify the defense of h6. Although it is fairly weak, and that locks my knight down to just babysitting the h6 pawn. However, maybe I can play h5. He plays queen h4, so h5 was something I was thinking about. First, I decided to put my king on g7, double defense on h6. Maybe h5 was a better move, although lots of dark squared weaknesses if I do play it, and maybe his queen could come immediately to g5 and sneak in somehow. I don't know. But here he pulls back to g3 with his queen. It is a little scary, but I don't think he has a way to break in yet. And so now I have to come up with a plan for how I can start pushing him back. I've got enough defenses, and I thought, let's go for something here. He now is no longer looking at h6 twice, so my knight doesn't have to defend the h6 pawn. And maybe I can maneuver my knight around, get it to the f5 square, which looks much more powerful, still defending h6. So I thought maybe I have a chance here. I move my knight up to e7, and my opponent quickly realized what was happening here. He has a tactic. He's looking at that h6 square, knowing that if he takes it, my king will be left on h6. He's just double checking, making sure things work. And he goes for it. Bishop takes h6. If king takes, queen comes to h4, forking my knight on e7 and the king. He didn't see this, and I knew I had blundered a pawn. It is what it is. I knew I had to take the bishop. I mean, you can't just blunder a pawn and not take the piece there. His queen comes to h4. I go back to g7, and he's looking at the e7 knight. He's about to grab it. He's just double checking that he's not blundering. Always needs to be done. You have to double check these kinds of things. And I immediately put my queen on d8, offering him a queen trade. Now I knew my king was not as safe as his king. And so giving a queen trade here, I have much better chances of outplaying him in an endgame when the queens are off the board. At least that's what I thought. And so here I was very happy when he decided to trade queens. I honestly think this is an area of my game that I've improved at quite a bit recently, knowing when to keep queens on and when to trade them off. And before, I used to just get up a pawn and trade off queens. You know, I don't want any counterplay. But now I think I've gotten quite a bit more comfortable keeping queens on when I only have a pawn lead, or trying to trade them off when my opponent only has a one pawn lead, because I can use my rooks well in an endgame and hopefully get to an endgame where he's up a pawn, but everything else is gone except for rooks, and the game's, you know, actually a draw. It's very easy to draw endgames. And so I knew here that I was fighting for a draw, and I was hoping that I could get it. His rook comes up to e3. I saw that he wanted to target f7. I pull my bishop back just to defend f7. And now I'm going to just get ready for a pawn push. Essentially right now my plan is just to push d4. If he captures, I can recapture and target his bishop on d3 and double my rooks. My rooks are going to get to the second rank and infiltrate quicker than his are. And so I was feeling good, actually. You know, I was feeling pretty good in this endgame. I wasn't feeling like it was completely lost. The engine actually says that this position is about a 0.3 advantage for white, Whereas before he took that pawn on h6 and went for those tactics, he was up like 2.5. So I was honestly feeling pretty good here. He slid his rook over to f3. I pushed d4. And now he has to decide, does he want to take and exchange pawns on the d4 square? Or is he going to do something else? Even though the position is completely equal here, and now that he plays bishop to e4, I didn't know that I had a slight edge, like a negative 0.1, 0.2 advantage. You know, it still felt like I had an advantage. I don't know how to explain it, but like I'm down a pawn here, and I felt like I was doing well. I think it was just the activity of my pieces, and I think you just have to go for activity in chess. Here I'm considering, do I take on c3? I did decide to take on c3, and if he recaptures, well, I can't capture back immediately, but look at his pawns. He's got two isolated pawns, one on the A file, one on the C file, and although he's up a pawn, I'm feeling very confident in winning one of them. The B pawn taking on c3 was the big mistake there. The position went from like a -2 to like a whole point advantage for me, because now he's got the isolated pawns. So here I was thinking, do we try to double? Maybe I have a simple double of rooks, just going rook to c4 and tempoing the bishop. This is not what I went for. I instead went rook to c5, tempoing the pawn, and I was ready to just sling my other rook over to c8, have him doubled, and go after that pawn on c3. I went for rook to c5 first because that pawn could not be defended, whereas if I went to c4, his bishop could be defended. Here my opponent attacks my pawn on a6, and I immediately move up to a5, causing my opponent to stress with the time pressure. He's under 5 minutes here, as you can see on the clock. I knew that a5 here was decent, and now he's getting ready to move his rook. He moves his rook over to e3. This actually defends his pawn, which I initially thought couldn't be defended. But now his bishop is sort of sitting in my territory, and I knew that maybe I'd be able to trap it somehow, or at least go after it and get some tempos back here. The idea that I had was rook b8, hitting his bishop, and then once his bishop moves, coming back to c8. And then can he defend his c3 pawn? Well, maybe rook to c1, but then I have my pawn up to b4. So all this was going through my mind here, and I play rook to b8. He knows he's got to move his bishop. He's low on the clock here. He reaches and pulls his bishop back to f3. I immediately go rook c8. His time is getting lower. I'm trying to amp up the pressure. Something you can do a little bit more than you can do online. You can really sort of move quickly and hit the clock with force and a bit of thunder in your movements, you know. So this is what I was trying to do a wee bit, trying to maybe intimidate him, try to bully him a bit. I could tell by his body language that he was a bit stressed here, trying to find a way for the win. He knew that if he lost this game, he was going to lose a lot of elo. He was feeling the pressure. Here he spent quite a bit of time looking for a move. Here he plays the move a4, trying to find a way to stop me pushing. He knows that my idea here is to push b4, and he didn't want to put his rook on c1 because b4, then, you know, the c3 pawn is pinned. Here I take on a4, and my bishop all the way back on e8 is actually defending the a4 pawn, which was amazing. I felt like my bishop was actually being useful now. He moves his rook up to a3, defending that pawn on c3 twice. I know that activity is key, and so instead of just having two rooks looking at a pawn, I decide I'm going to put a rook on the b file. I go rook to b8, and I'm looking at invading on b1, checking his king, and I'm feeling very good here. I also have the idea of coming rook to b3, hitting his rook on a3, maybe getting a pass pawn on the a file. So all of this is going through my mind, and here my opponent is stressed on the clock. He's down to 2 minutes. He's looking for a way. Can he win that pawn on a4? he pulls his bishop back to d1, a blunder, because I know that I have a pin. Rook to b1 pins his bishop to the king. How is he going to defend that bishop? He's going to have to do only one move, which is rook e1. He knew as soon as I played rook to b1 that he had messed up. He pulls his rook back, and here I can just apply pressure to the pinned piece. Screw the pawns. Forget all about him. I'm just going for his bishop now. However, first I do go rook to c1. Two rooks looking at the c3 pawn, but more importantly, I needed to just put a rook on the d file, rook to d5, and apply pressure to that bishop. It's going to fall. I could sense that the time was really getting to my opponent. He was upset with himself. He knew that he'd messed up. Here I had 6 minutes on the clock. I don't need to rush, but I do want to keep applying more pressure if I can. But the move's jumping off the page at me. I know it's rook d5, looking at his bishop, looking at it twice. It can't be defended here. I'm going to be capturing that bishop on the next move and be up a minor piece. He plays his bishop up to f3. I take with check, which maybe he didn't realize it was with check. I don't know. That the nerves were probably getting to him. I pull my rook back to d1, defending my rook on d5. He takes on d5. I take on d5. I'm up a bishop. He advances his king up to e3. My bishop's doing all the work on e8, defending the a4 pawn. So I just decide, let's go for activity with my rook, see if I can start picking off some pawns. He pushes his pawn to c4. And here, I don't know if this move is best, but I come back rook to b1. Probably not good to allow his king to be active. I could have just placed my bishop on a c6. The time is getting to me as well. I'm a bit nervous, but I do think maybe I can just pull my rook up to b4 or b3, attacking his rook. He doesn't want to trade rooks. He pulls back to a2. And now I'm thinking, do I push my pawn? No, probably not a good idea. Bishop on e8, it's defending it. I want my bishop to still be useful, so maybe I'll just use my rook to go after the pawns. Rook to g3 is in my mind. Do I go for that? I'm targeting the g2 pawn there, but he's also defending. I'm not entirely sure. I don't want his king to be able to advance too much here. If his king's able to advance, then maybe this pawn is going to become a big issue for me. Activity is the way. King to f8. I'm going to get my king involved. Stop his king moving up the board. He continues pushing his king up to c5. He's going to go c6, c7, hopefully push the pawn up. That's what he wants. Not hopefully for me. I want to keep advancing my king. King comes to e7. He realizes he can't move the king any further up. My bishop's doing such a good job at defending that light squared diagonal. He's not able to step onto the c6 square, and now I can just move my king in. But if I move my king in, am I going to get in trouble? If I come onto the light squared diagonal, I might block my bishop's defense of a4. So instead, I just move my bishop up to c6, and then I'm going to move my king over. This way, both pieces can be active. My bishop can stay active in the position. He starts to stress. 40 seconds on the clock. He plays h4. I just pull over to g3, knowing that I can go after some pawns. He attacks my bishop on c6. I can just slide my king over, although I am slightly anxious about this. I'm nervous because he has a check on d2 with his rook. Do I do that, or do I pull my bishop back? I decided, yes, I can do this. Even though he's got the check, I'm going to be okay. He moves his king up to b6, stopping my king getting to the c7 square, but I'm able to take on g2 because the bishop's doing such a beautiful job at defending my rook. He plays up to a3, and now my rook can come over to the b file with check, or it could have come over to the d file and just controlled that whole file for myself. He wasn't able to play rook d3 there because he was in check, but if he wasn't in check, obviously rook d3 would have won my bishop. So I had to be very careful here. I pull back to the f2 square, hoping that I can get king to c7 any second. If his king moves back in, I'm in trouble. But here I know that I have time to move my bishop somewhere, or just control the d file with my rook. And this is what I go for, rook to d2. The wind is cutting out of his sails now. He plays c5. I'm able to start to have a decisive advantage here. I pull the rook up to d4, looking at the f4 pawn, but also getting ready to come over to the b file, maybe giving a check, forcing the king away, and then controlling the c7 square with my king. He defends his pawn on c5, so I just take on f4. Simply, he checks my king, and I'm able now to pull the bishop for defense. He checks my king. I pull back to c8, and here I know that I'm able to move the rook over to b4, check the king, and then move up and take that c6 pawn. He's very stressed here. He's down to 18, 17 seconds, 16. He moves his rook over to c3, a3, attacking my pawn. I go in for the check. He comes back in between both of my pieces. I throw a check in here, 2 pieces attacking his pawn. And even though I'm going to lose the a4 pawn here, I know that if I maneuver my king over to d8, I've closed my opponent's king in a box. King to d8 holds the e7 square. And this is a beautiful way to finish the game. I play king to d8. He moves the pawn up to c7. I capture with the rook. And here he knows the end's in sight. He's only got 27 seconds. He takes the pawn on a4. And I give him a checkmate on rook to c6. The engine says that my opponent played with an 82.3% accuracy and I played with an 88.5%. I did feel really bad for my opponent. He seemed to be quite upset that he lost to someone who's, a few hundred points lower rated than himself. But I guess that's the reality of chess. He played exceptionally well. He outplayed me in the opening, middle game. I just got fortunate in the endgame. But I hope you lads enjoyed round 1 of the Rising Stars Mesa tournament here in Arizona. They do it every month, so do come to this tournament. It is a lot of fun, and I'll have videos on the rest of the rounds on my YouTube channel very soon, so do stick around, and I'll see you all very soon.